To my dearest friends, I am honored to welcome you back once more for a detailed investigation into the unique biology and anatomy of what may very well be the most horrifying aliens we have thus far encountered, the Tyranids. Though they are indeed to be considered as a species, we must realize that they are not to be seen as a species in the typical sense of the word, and that it can be quite a struggle for us to truly comprehend their alien nature. The Tyranids are not a people, nor a nation, nor even an empire, as they have no culture, no ethics, no morals, nor even a creed beyond the primal goals of feeding and growing. They are hunger-given flesh, and a manifestation of the endless desire to consume and adapt, now drowning out the very stars themselves with their truly endless swarms. To gaze upon them is to see the sum of every evolutionary arms race, every predator-prey struggle, and every desperate fight for survival that has ever existed. Whereas a conventional civilization may erect monuments to their glory, amass vast armies to defend themselves, or tell stories of their bygone times, the Tyranids will instead move on instinct, establishing themselves only because their hive fleets may endure, by devouring all forms of life. Scholars have often sought metaphors in order to contain the incomprehensible within their own language. The first is that of an insectile hive, comparing them to ants, termites, or wasps, which produce swarms that are not dependent on any individual, and which may simply overwhelm their foes through sheer numbers, responding to external stimuli, whilst being utterly obedient to their parental hive. Another comparison would be found in the plagues of locusts, which descend upon crops, leaving nothing but dust where there was once salubrious abundance. But even these fall as pale shadows before the true scale of the Tyranid horror. There is far more to them than swarming vermin, as they may shape their bodies in response to any foe, rapidly adapting and changing into the perfect counter to nullify any threat which has found a method to destroy them. Even their hierarchy is flexible, with the hives producing new synaptic beasts which may unify the lesser swarms and bring the mindless masses in line with the overarching will of the Gestalt hive mind. Others have looked to the oceanic depths for analogies, where they note the abyssopelagic denizens luring out prey with lantern lures before swallowing them whole in distended jaws, brimming with teeth like splinters of glass. But we must temper such comparisons, as we remember that the Tyranids were not born as creatures of our own stars, as they are in fact intergalactic predators, and whose alien biology is to be seen as equally exotic as it is horrifying. Yet, with this in mind, I do think that it would be prudent for us to scour the records of the Order Xenos and to learn all that we can on this monstrous species. We will begin by covering their biology, anatomy, and of their curious symbiotic links with weapon appendages and parasitic organs. We will then review their feeding and reproductive methods before covering the unfathomable presence of the hive mind and of the psychic organisms which have become innately tied to the Gestalt. To end, I will then move away from the microscopic anatomy to the macroscopic, showcasing the connected biology of the hive fleets and of their methods of hunting within the inky blackness of the void. But for now, I have bloviated enough on feeble comparisons, and so, my dearest friends, I do believe that it is now time for us to begin. We must remember that to call them as a simple enemy will diminish their true horror, but for any foe, knowledge will unlock the hidden methods to defeat them. And so, let us proceed by learning of the alien biology and anatomy of the predatory Tyranids. Though this will indeed sound heretical to some of you, but there is an argument to be made that the tyranids are a perfected form of life. They are predators, plain and simple, and so their biology has been adapted and refined in order to allow them to hunt and feast without wasting precious biomass on anything which may be secondary to this task. Even in a lowly gaunt, there is no aspect of their form which does not serve the purpose of predation, as even their organs and tissues have all been produced to heighten their strengths, whereas their weaknesses are all but invalidated due to the sheer number of bioforms deployed during a planetary invasion. The following points will relate to the tyranids in general, though keep in mind that some specialized bioforms will possess additional organs or tissues, which provide them with their unique capabilities. Their tyranid body is clad in chitinous armor, being made up of layers of hardened keratin and alien resins fused into plates as durable as plasteel, yet flexible enough to permit their predatory speed. This armor is not uniform, but will be sculpted according to the demands of the organism, so for a lowly gaunt, it will be thin, angular, and primarily found upon their backs, so when they advance as a living tide, the plates will form a cohesive shield, protecting the masses from any fire from above. Conversely, a tyrant guard is a specialized bioform which solely exists to protect the leading hive tyrants, and so they are utterly covered in incredibly thick plates, shielding much of their body so as to make them as living bastions, capable of shrugging off even the blasts of small tanks. But for all tyranids, their carapace will be joined by a leathery dermis, dotted with glands which seep out a slick aqueous effusion that some have speculated as being some form of external immune system, protecting their bodies from any harmful particles or microorganisms. With that said, all within their species are thought to possess an alien microflora, both internally and externally, which has been found to rapidly outcompete the microbial growth from our own galaxy, further protecting them from bacterial infections. As a brief note, when we do peel back the carapace and reveal the inner biology, further glands will release an ooze of resinous material which rapidly hardens into a new carapace layer, suggesting some degree of regeneration of their exoskeleton. But for all tyranids, beneath their carapace shell lies a dense muscular system, far more powerful and explosive than near any creature native to our galaxy. Bundled cords of fibrous tissue run through their limbs, granting an astonishing level of speed and strength, allowing gaunts to leap and bound through the field, whilst also providing the heft to the larger beasts to crash through the reinforced walls of a bunker. Their circulatory systems seem to possess a great deal of redundancy, meaning that the creatures could be significantly damaged from an attack, yet would not die from hemorrhaging or shock. Their blood, if we could even call it blood, is made up of a hitherto undiscovered oxy-rich compound, far superior to our own hemoglobin, mixed with a complex ecosystem of microorganisms. They seem to possess a number of analogous organs to creatures of our own galaxy, interspaced with novel clusters of unidentifiable tissues. Their respiratory system appears to be somewhat gill-like, with there being several breathing holes found across the organism's body and head. As expected, their digestive tract is brimming with a dense cocktail of enzymatic fluids, though they appear to contain a gizzard-like structure in the lower esophagus, which grinds any consumed matter into a paste, making it far easier to digest. But to speak of the tyranid biology, we now must consider their weapons, for they are not constructed and equipped by the bioforms, and instead they are grafted into the body as a symbiotic organism, grown alongside their host, until they become innately and terminally bound. Every tyranid has been observed with some form of weaponry, and which are most often found attached to their upper set of limbs, with the rear set ending in cloven hooves, and the middle set sometimes supporting their movement or being bound to additional armaments. The flesh borer is the simplest example of this. To the untrained eye, it appears as a crude firearm, a lumpen growth of sinew and chitin clutched in the host's claws. In truth, it has grown to replace their front appendages, whilst connecting itself to the host's organs, intermixing with their alien blood and feeding off of their stored nutrition. It is also not just a weapon as we would consider one, as it is in fact a colony, a living nest, housing tiny swarms of squirming beetle-like organisms whose own bodies are filled to the brim with digestive acids. When fired, the weapon hurls these creatures into the air, their instinct driving them to burrow into their prey, where they erupt in sprays of liquefied tissue. There is no reloading such a weapon, as the appendage will simply breed new swarms of ammunition until they are fit to burst out and hunt down their prey. Other symbiotes are similarly elaborate, with devourers spewing forth larval worms with barbed maws, each one a writhing predator that tears its way into flesh, chewing through their victim as they work their way towards the poor target's succulent brain. Venom cannons, meanwhile, are pressurized organs that contain crystallized shards of an incredibly potent poison, which when fired can easily puncture heavy armors before releasing their corrosive and toxic contents. As a brief point, some of their melee weapons, including the scything talons or rending claws, appear to be a direct mutation of the tyranid organism, which have developed into incredibly sharpened blades, capable of slicing through even the hardened armor of an Astartes Terminator. Bone swords, meanwhile, are a form of the aforementioned symbiotic weapon, which actually contain a small brain, though they are utterly incapable of independent thought. It is thought that this nervous system produces the psychic sheath around the blade, granting it with the power to cleave through almost any foe, whilst amplifying the psionic abilities of the host. Some of the first xenobiologists to examine the tyrannids equated these weapons to cancerous growths, and posited that they might one day become overgrown, possibly to the detriment of the host organism. In reality, however, the weapons seem to have struck a careful balance with their hosts, forming a symbiotic relationship where they receive nutritional sustenance and provide the bioform with the offensive means to prolong their life. Almost every known tyrannid will possess some form of symbiotic weapon, to the point where the very idea of an unarmed tyrannid is truly meaningless. Moving away from their weapons, it is important to note that there is no fixed template for a tyrannid, and that no two of their kind are ever truly identical. Though countless millions of gaunts may seem interchangeable, each organism is the product of the hive mind's genetic tailoring, producing forms with slight variations and minor adaptations to better suit their current needs. Still, there are some conserved features, such as the small slits found across their leathery dermis, which are thought to regulate their temperature by dispersing some of the heat produced from their rapid metabolism. Larger bioforms, however, might be found with spore chimneys upon their backs, which in addition to dissipating heat, will also billow out with clouds of spores and poisons, occluding their surroundings in a choking fog of death. But now that we have a firm grasp on their biology and anatomy, we should now think of their consumption and ask ourselves as to how the tyrannids feed, and more importantly, how they reproduce. As we discussed, the very anatomy of the tyrannids has shaped them into living weapons, but with this being the case, we can begin to understand that their ceaseless appetite is utterly essential, as they truly do require an endless ocean of biomass to fuel their relentless swarms. It's quite interesting to consider that the Tyranids are not here to conquer our worlds in the conventional sense, nor to establish some kind of alien empire, as they have only entered our galaxy to consume every last mote of biological matter, stripping the cosmos bare before moving on to their next prey. When a hive fleet descends upon a planet, the process is incomparably thorough, and their alien minds will not even consider the concept of mercy when it comes to their endless feast. First comes the rain of spores, released in choking clouds to blacken the skies. These spores then burrow into the earth before swelling into tendrils, then blossoming forth as bloated capillary towers, towering up through the fog to brush against the stratosphere above. Beneath them, digestion pools will form as vast, seething lakes of enzyme-rich fluids that reduce all matter down to its basic components. Into these pools will be cast the broken bodies of the fallen, the vegetation of forests, and even the Tyranids themselves once their invasion is complete. The large oceans will be acidified and seeded with microorganisms to transform it into a fathomless digestion pool, with any cities destined to be toppled into them and reduced to slurry within hours. After the defense forces of a world have been defeated, immense tides of ripper swarms will comb the landscapes, feasting upon all forms of biological matter, before dragging their engorged selves towards the pools, throwing themselves in and allowing their biomass to be subsumed by the hive. From the digestion pools, the harvested biomass will be sucked skyward through the capillary towers, drawn into the waiting guts of the hive ships that loom above the stricken world. Entire atmospheres are bled away, the oceans then drained, tectonic life siphoned until absolutely nothing of value remains. The crust of the planet is left behind as a husk, the world now lifeless and waterless, stripped of even microbial life, until it is little more than a barren rock, drifting silently through the darkening void. This consumption then fuels the next cycle, reproduction. From the swollen bowels of the hive ships, deep within the cavernous birthing chambers, dwell the monstrous creatures known as Norn queens. We could consider them as the architects of the swarm, being vast, immobile entities whose bodies have been fused with the greater bioship and whose sole purpose is to act as a living factory to the endless swarms of the aliens. Each Norn queen is the front of Tyranid life, spawning countless broods with each passing moment. But they do not create randomly, and rather each clutch will be tailored to the needs of the hive, sometimes focusing on hosts of gaunts for one battle, broods of lictors for another, or the seeds of a bioship for a coming war. The act of Tyranid reproduction is truly disgusting, and it is not a birth in the way that humanity understands it. There is no pairing, no fertilization, no lineage, and instead it is just a crude form of biological manufacture. Cells are recombined, genomes rethreaded, prey DNA spliced and bent into new forms, forced to intermix, purely to serve the needs of the growing hive. Tyranids are not born into families, as the individual is but a mindless beast, whose purpose is to spread the fleet and consume more prey. They do not think, nor live in any human sense, as they are to be grown, deployed, expended, then recycled. There is no existence for the Tyranids which does not serve the dual purposes of expanding and feasting. The Norn queens are not entirely alone in their labor, as they will be connected to living incubation chambers aboard the hive ships, which function as vats, where biomass is poured into proverbial molds of flesh and bone. Here, entire broods may gestate within hours, bursting forth in floods of claws and mandibles, each already armed and ready for the hunt. Some are churned out en masse, destined to swarm and die in their countless billions, whereas others are more carefully sculpted, their forms honed by the hive mind's will into specialized instruments of war. As heretical as it may sound, there is a hideous sense of elegance to this cycle. The prey of one world becomes the predator of the next. Genes stripped from the defenders will be melted down, then analyzed, refined, and reincorporated into the growing swarm. Armor resistant to fire, toxins potent against certain physiologies, or psychic potential gleaned from a gifted victim, all will be blended into the genetic cauldron of the hive. The next brood may carry these traits, if they are indeed considered as valuable, whereas genetic weaknesses will be plucked out and discarded lest they poison the tyrannids from the moment of their birth. It can be tempting to think of the tyrannids as parasites, as though they were lice or ticks feeding upon a host unable to shake them. But this analogy falls short as soon as you consider that parasites depend on the survival of their prey. The tyrannids, however, do not. They are more akin to a wildfire, rampantly spreading through a field, consuming everything in their path and leaving only ash. A planet that has known the touch of the tyrannids will never recover. Its seas are gone, its soil sterilized, its skies emptied, and it will never bear life again. My prior comparison to a wildfire, though accurate, does hold some flaws, in that a wildfire will move almost at random, depending entirely on the winds and conditions of an environment which dictate its blazing path. For the tyrannids, however, their swarms are controlled not by mere nature, but instead by the vast and truly incomprehensible consciousness of the hive mind. It is not an individual creature, nor even a council, as this is a gestalt consciousness, an ocean of thought, with every creature as a single drop within it, and every synapse a ripple which extends its reach. Every tyrannid is but an insignificant mote when compared to the greater whole, yet they are innately tied, as it is from the combined consciousness of every creature which brings the hive mind into existence. And it is from the hive mind which guides the swarm towards its future proliferation. When the fleets descend upon a world, the psychic pall of the hive mind will be felt long before its claws. Astropaths speak of the phenomenon known as the shadow in the warp, which is a suffocating silence that nullifies all psionic abilities and drowns out every other voice. Where affected, mortal psychers will find their power choked, their minds gnawed upon by the alien static. It is not a deliberate attack by any means, but merely a side effect of the tyrannid presence, as though the galaxy itself cannot bear the presence of a consciousness so vast. The conduits to this will are the synapse creatures, such as the warriors, hive tyrants, or zoanthropes. Each will act as a node, which the hive mind can utilize to extend its control down into the writhing swarm. Lesser creatures, including the gaunts or rippers, typically act on animalistic instinct. But once connected to the hive, they will suddenly begin to move in unified purpose, animated by the unfathomable will of the hive mind passed down through the synaptic chain. Should these links be severed, then the lesser creatures will immediately revert to their feral behavior, where they are still lethal, though markedly unfocused and uncoordinated. The synapse web is sometimes equated to the command structure of a conventional army, where some scholars will name the hive tyrants as commanders or the warriors as filling a role similar to a lieutenant. But yet again, human analogies fail to describe the tyrannids, as there can be no hierarchy in a species where no sense of individuality exists, nor in one where every creature draws from the same gestalt mind. A hive tyrant does not command in the sense of issuing orders, as it serves as the will of the swarm, expressed in chitinous flesh. A warrior does not interpret any form of intent, as it merely acts as a conduit, transmitting the psychic will of the alien superintelligence down to the mindless beasts. The directions we perceive between ruler and ruled are purely artificial, born out of our need to impose familiar shapes upon what is most assuredly an alien race. To slightly contradict myself here, I will note that hive tyrants are granted with a glimmer of strategic awareness, allowing them to execute novel maneuvers on the field without requiring the prerequisite impulse from the hive mind. This has only been provided to allow them to immediately respond to the changing tides of battle, and we should not consider it as a trait of individuality or freedom within the swarm. Their awareness is not their own, and it is but a mask worn by the hive mind, existing as a temporary foci for an intelligence too vast to inhabit a single skull. Within this synaptic web exist organisms who have been specifically shaped in order to harness the powers of the warp, only to be used as weapons. The zoanthrope is perhaps the most grotesque example, with its body withered and feeble, carrying a grossly engorged head pulsing with brain matter, too heavy to be lifted by its frailty without the powers of psychic levitation. Through this deformity flows a psionic might sufficient to rend apart great battle tanks or to burn down entire squads of guardsmen into warped fields of ash. According to several leading xenobiologists, these bioforms were first recorded in the hive fleet of the Kraken, and so it is hypothesized that they are the result of splicing the psionic genes from Eldari DNA into the frame of a Tyranid warrior, which was then heavily altered to compensate for the enlarged brain. More horrifying still are the neurothropes, which feed directly from the psychic essence of their prey, sucking dry the souls of the mortal species, leaving their victims as empty husks, entirely devoid of life. To them, a soul is just another form of biomass, no different than flesh, in that it exists to be consumed and subsumed. They will devour your thoughts, drinking deep from the warp fire that leaks from dying psykers, and in doing so, they replenish their nightmarish power to kill again. As an interesting point, when we examine the curious offshoots of the gene stealers, who are indeed tyrannids, though have evolved to serve the unique purpose of infiltration, we will find that they are linked by an alternate version of the hive mind, which has been appropriately named as the brood mind. This psychic field will ensnare the minds of the gene stealers as well as their cultists, silently compelling them to serve the brood lord, whilst ensuring complete loyalty until the fated day of ascension. As a final point on the hive mind, the actual synapse connection will be established in the commanding creatures via a series of complex nodes found within their cortex. These are incredibly dense, and it has been posited that they must require a great deal of biomass to produce, which is why we do not find them in abundance throughout the lesser bioforms. But for the hive tyrants, which are already seen as a great investment, the fleets can justify the inclusion of a robust synapse network, as the biomass will soon pay dividends by increasing the effectiveness of the wider swarm. It would be wrong to refer to the Tyranids as an army. Though yes, they might be deployed upon a world racing towards their victorious state of total consumption, but they are not some separate force, disconnected from the whole. Every single Tyranid should be seen as a part of the same superorganism, with individual deployments only being the very tip of an appendage sprouted from the main body of the invasive species. If we were to zoom out from a battlefield, we would see that the gaunts and warriors are but an extension of the orbiting bioships, which themselves are found at the front of the great hive fleets. But even further back, they would all coalesce into one body, one great spear, jutting through the darkness of the intergalactic void. But broadly speaking, the Tyranids have invaded our galaxy in these hive fleets, which are rather distinct in their tactics, colors, and will often produce unique bioforms, or become adapted with traits that have become synonymous with their hive. Within these fleets, we will find the bioships, which are also living organisms connected to the gestalt of the hive mind, and solely focused on consuming the oceans of biomass found across the galaxy. Their bodies, large enough to blot out the light of the stars, are sheathed in organic armor just as resilient as any battleship's hull, yet pulsing and shifting like the hide of some oceanic leviathan. Its cavernous interiors will throb and hum with digestion sacs. The birthing chambers contort and writhe, whilst the nerve channels carry electrical impulses, forcing the beast through the darkness like some form of predatory whale. The hive ship might carry the swarms of the Tyranids, but it is also a part of the swarm itself. They are mere extensions of each other, and they will work together under the guiding hand of the hive mind to scour the galaxy of all forms of life. Around these colossal centers swarm the lesser biovessels, each a specialized form within the greater ecosystem. Some are sleek drone ships, predators of the void which strike like a shoal of bloodthirsty sharks. Others are bulbous spawning ships carrying incubation vats to flood the battlegrounds of a doomed world with fresh broods. Still others will resemble parasitic lampreys, their purpose to latch onto prey vessels, pump them full of corrosive acids, then suck them dry of their pathetic crews. And just as the Tyranid swarms know no waste, so too will the hive fleets. When a bioship is destroyed, its remains will not be abandoned. Tendril vessels drift towards it, drawn by chemical stimuli, before secreting fields of enzymes to break down its tissues, then siphoning the biomass back into the greater whole. If, of course, a vessel cannot be retrieved, then it has become known to us that the beasts of Hive Fleet, Hydra, will emerge, ready to scavenge and cannibalize on the remains of their cousin fleet to engorge themselves on Tyranid flesh. But this is where the distinctions between the hive fleets becomes apparent. Whereas the Hydra acts as a vulture towards the fallen Tyranids, another fleet, known as Kronos, has become specialized towards hunting down the foul scions of chaos, paying particular heed towards nullifying the effects of demons and other nefarious hellspawn. We must speculate on the purpose of such fleets and ask the question of whether their traits were intentional or incidental. For Kronos, I believe them to be intentionally designed by the hive mind as a means of countering the effects of chaos, since, as we all know, demons leave no biomass and so cannot sustain an encroaching hive fleet. Thus, if chaos were to consume the galaxy, then the Tyranids could lose in a war of attrition, so it makes sense for them to design a fleet which might nullify the demons and prevent them from spreading their taint. With that said, I am sure that some hive fleets have become specialized due to preferentially feasting upon certain targets, and that the consumption of their prey's DNA must have had an influence on the Tyranid bioforms. We spoke of the Kraken, which consumed many Eldari souls, giving rise to the psychic zoanthropes. But it has also been recently hypothesized that the brutish biovores may contain traces of orc DNA, explaining as to why they are so bloated and muscular. Consuming a world inhabited by billions of amphibians might give rise to bioforms which may breathe underwater, whereas a world of silicon-based life might lead to the gestation of strangely resistant shells. One could scarcely fathom the creatures which may be found within the hives if the Tyranids do in fact consume the entire galaxy, as the rich ecosystems of the Milky Way, teeming with diverse life, would surely provide the hive mind with an ample bounty of unique traits with which to craft the deadliest Tyranids ever known. But even though the fleets are distinct, they are all still facets of the same Great Devourer, with the only differences being their methods, though always striving towards the same goals of consumption. To fight one is to learn nothing of the next, as defenders who hold firm against one adaptation may collapse before the innovations of another. The Imperium cannot possibly catalogue them all, nor can it predict what is soon to come, for the swarm is ever changing and is anything but a static threat. The shifting tides of flesh will melt themselves down after every battle, only to be reformed into something new, having learnt from their strengths and weaknesses in their constant evolution towards predatory perfection. And so, when we look upon the Tyranids, either with a micro or macroscopic lens, we must ask, of what do we really see? These aliens are not an empire. They are no army. They possess no ideology, no faith. They are not on a crusade and are not pursuing even the smallest mote of glory. They come only to feed, for that is their singular purpose, and in their feeding, they are made whole. To examine a Tyranid on the operating table and to learn all we can from its corpse is one thing, but to compare their lives to the life of a human would truly be the work of a madman. The Imperium may chart the fleets, count the worlds consumed, and set against them the vast legions of man, but such numbers mean nothing when your enemy is the personification of an alien hunger that truly knows no end. Hunger does not tally. It does not come to bargain. It will never relent, and it will never know defeat. Every Tyranid organism, from the smallest wretch of a Ripper swarm up to the most colossal hive ship, they all exist only to consume and be consumed. Every drop of blood, every splinter of bone, every whisper of genetic code, it's all to be lumped together into a constituent sea of biomass and subsumed to feed the growing swarm. The dead will know no peace, as their bodies are dissolved and harvested, broken down only to be reborn in new forms, sharper, stronger, and far more terrible than before. In the short time from their first probing into our galaxy, the Tyranids have rapidly moved to become the apex predators of the Milky Way, and it is doubtful that they will ever be matched by any other, unless perhaps the warring species unite as one to fend off the Great Devourer once and for all. But even then, who's to say that the beasts won't simply adapt to the renewed defensive by carving out the means of their victory into the very flesh of the next generation? And even if they were defeated, if every fleet were destroyed, if every brood burned down, if every hive ship were shattered and scattered into the void, then the hive mind would still remain. From some forgotten spore in the galactic dark, the cycle would begin anew, for hunger never truly dies. And thus, my dearest friends, I do believe that we have now come to our end. Thank you all so much for listening to this investigation into the Tyranid menace in its entirety, and I do hope you enjoyed the granular look into their terrible species. But for now, I must once again close this chapter, and so as I depart once more, I will wish you all with a very warm goodbye.